Hello and welcome again to this edition of Capital Dateline. I'm your host, Brad Swanson. We are coming to you just a few blocks from Florida's capital here at the headquarters of the Florida Cable Telecommunications Association. I am once again joined by Jim Saunders, Executive Editor of the News Service of Florida, to tell us what's happening as we start to begin committee weeks and recover from post-hurricane impact on Florida. So, Jim, how are you?
Good.
All right, so hurricanes, obviously new in my introduction monologue, but definitely new on the Florida political scene as far as budget issues, impacts. It's been grave, but tell us what you're seeing as far as what's going on with the hurricanes and how are they going to affect the session?
Well, I think it's going to really reshape the session. A month and a half ago, we didn't think we were going to be dealing with these issues going into session, but it's having, Hurricane Irma is having major effects in a lot of ways on what the legislature is going to consider. The biggest job of the legislature every year is to pass a budget, and the state economists have already said that the hurricane is going to hurt the budget. It's going to cost the state a bunch of money. And the legislature was going into session with a very slim surplus in the first place, around $50 million. And pretty much Amy Baker, who's the chief economist for the legislature, said last month, Hurricane Irma has wiped that out, and essentially they're going into session in the hole. There's always been this discussion about whether rebuilding helps the budget, but she said that's sort of a farce. That really the costs are greater than the financial benefits to the budget. So that's one of the major things they're going to have to deal with, is that it's going to affect the budget. But the hurricane's got so many tentacles. We're already going to be seeing that in committee meetings this week. They're going to be talking about utility infrastructure, for instance, which there's a lot of discussion about power outages. Some places were a week or longer. There's issues about nursing homes. The generator issue at the nursing homes, right, going to be a big issue.
And they're dealing with this with a special committee, right?
Well, the House is. They've formed a select committee to deal with these hurricane issues. The Senate's kind of got them scattered all over the place, or the issues scattered all over. Another big one is agriculture. Took a big hit by Irma. The initial estimate's $2.5 billion impact on the agriculture industry. You got to figure the legislature's going to react to that somehow. So again, the tentacles from this go out all over the place. In addition, just the sheer human impact of the storm. I mean, also property insurance could become a factor, although we're not really seeing numbers at this point that indicate any great crisis in the property insurance industry like we saw after the 04 and 05 hurricanes that were just devastating.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about it. So we got that committee in the House. Let's go back to nursing homes. Mm-hmm. So the governor had asked for a time certain to install generators. And how did you see that come out from the governor's office? And then how did you see the industry respond? And where does that stand?
Well, I think if there's going to be one sort of lasting impression of this hurricane, I mean, obviously there's been so much damage, but the fact that these nursing home residents died at this Broward County nursing home that lost its air conditioning system for 3 days, I think that's something people are going to remember for a long time. I mean, it had a major impression. 8 people died in one day, and then 4 more have died since then, and they're, I guess the causes of death are still sort of being investigated. But I think it's such a high-profile incident that it's going to be just a big issue during session. But to your point, the governor came out and his agencies ordered emergency rules to require nursing homes and assisted living facilities to have generators that could provide air conditioning if the power goes out. But sort of the rub on the thing is that they ordered it to be done within 60 days. And the nursing home and ALF industry say, we can comply with this, but you got to give us some time. And also they're looking for some money. But to do this within 60 days, they say, is just unreasonable. So there's been 3 challenges which have been wrapped into one to the governor's emergency order, or the emergency rules. That are going to be coming up in a hearing this week.
Right.
They're saying, basically that the governor's agencies did not follow the proper procedures and that this can't be done.
Right.
So, but even if even if it isn't done within 60 days, I think it's pretty clear that this is going to be an issue during session, and there's going to be some generator requirements pushed pretty heavily during session. And the governor even said in his initial directive on this that emergency rules are temporary. They're temporary. But he even said in his original directive that he wants to put this into law and make it law. And Senator Rene Garcia, who's very involved in these issues, he's the chairman of a committee that oversees elder affairs. He has said, there may have been one bad actor that had this problem, but he said we've got to do something. So I tend to think that's the direction the legislature is going to go.
And just judging by the statements from the president of the Nursing Homes Industry Association, I mean, they were very responsive, and again, they made that same argument that Senator Garcia made, which was, we've got X hundred of nursing homes in the state of Florida, many impacted by the storm, and we had this one issue that we need to address.
And obviously, the case in Broward County is just, it's hard to believe almost, but there were other nursing homes and ALFs around the state that did lose their air conditioning. Right. They didn't have the tragic consequences that the issue in Broward did, but there were others that lost power and air conditioning. So, these are issues that the industry is handling very delicately. They know how, the public relations of this thing. But
so are you saying a few public affairs firms in town might be engaged during this legislative
I think I've talked to a couple of them. It's a very delicate issue, but there's also large costs involved, and the nursing homes get a lot of nursing homes and ALFs get a lot of money of their revenue through Medicaid. Right. So they're going to go to the legislature and say, you know what, these generators can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. They're not something you go to Lowe's and buy off the rack. Right. And we need some money to help with this. So there's another issue that kind of makes it even more complicated.
That might factor into Ms. Baker's calculations on money impacts.
Well, it hadn't at that point, but it might in the future.
We'll see. Well, okay, so another issue that is directly related to the hurricane, both Maria and Irma, is the impact on Puerto Rico. Mm-hmm. And for the first time in my recollection, Florida, humongous chunk of Florida policy and conversation is targeted at another entity within the United States, which is, not another state, but it's a territory, and it's on Puerto Rico. And we have tons of Puerto Ricans in Florida. We have a huge population. It's changed voting demographics across the board. But how do you see policy for the upcoming session and just in general the predisposition of our elected officials towards that issue?
Well, I think there's two issues to look at. One is policy and one is politics. From a policy standpoint, there's a lot of thought that there could be a large number of Puerto Rican residents come to Florida because there's been such devastation down there. For instance, we saw last week there's some directives that went out to schools to allow children to enroll, and basically, breaking down some of the usual bureaucratic requirements before kids can enroll. Right. Same thing's going on in the university system and the state college system. So they are making arrangements for what could be an influx of folks coming into the state that need services, and they need. So I think there's going to be. Again, I hate to make everything a money issue, but that has a budget impact. Right. If there's a lot more kids coming into, for instance, coming in the school system than what the Florida has been anticipating. So there's there are policy issues like that in case there are a large influx of folks who are trying to get their lives back in order here rather than in Puerto Rico.
Well, and even on just core response, the governor declared a state of emergency to react to the needs of Puerto Rico, and just driving up any of the major corridors in Florida, you see pallet trucks of wood heading south, and that's not necessarily all for Florida. That's getting shipped to Puerto Rico.
Yeah, he's been trying to make arrangements. I don't know that a statewide state of emergency, I'm not entirely sure that is necessary, but certainly there are areas of the state where I think that the Orlando area, the Puerto Rican population has exploded there over the last, 15, 20 years, I don't know what the time frame is, but there's been a large growth in the population there. So you got to figure if people are escaping Puerto Rico, they may go see family or stay with their family or friends or get settled in those sorts of areas. Obviously South Florida as well, but you know, so there could be a lot of impacts on the state, and I think that's sort of what the state's trying to look for. Now, I also think there is a definite political angle to all this. I mean, as we've seen, you know, particularly in the Orlando area, the influx of Puerto Rican residents in that area over the years have really changed the politics in that area. It's become a very democratic in a lot of areas down there.
Osceola County.
Osceola County, parts of Orange County have become have turned Democratic after being sort of traditionally Republican or conservative Democrat. You know, so. I think you can't ignore totally the political angle of this. The governor has been out front trying to, you know, put his stamp on the fact that, hey, we care about Puerto Rico. We care about the residents. He made a day trip down there at one point, and he's also just kept it in the forefront. Meanwhile, Bill Nelson, the U.S. Senator who's probably going to be challenged by Scott next year, you know, he's been also trying to, you know, raise his visibility that he's looking out for the Puerto Rican, you know, both Puerto Rican folks who live here, but also those who may be coming into the state. So I think that there's a lot of political calculations going on, and you know, we've been hearing for years that Hispanic voters could shift the tide of politics in Florida, and it's happened in certain areas, but it hasn't really happened on statewide level, I don't think. But there's all sorts of trends that I think a lot of people are making calculations.
Well, just like Chavez, you know, his regime forced, you know, a ton of Venezuelans to Brickell and rebuilt the city of Doral, you know, and that changed those voting demographics from, you know, conservative Cuban voters to, you know, a blend. So we'll stay tuned for how that affects politics. I'm sure the pollsters are eager to get a crack at it and see what the new one looks like. All right, so let's shift gears from Puerto Rico to Governor Scott. Governor Scott recently rolled out an opioid program and to address the crisis in Florida. Tell us a little bit about that and where's that going?
Well, I think this is another issue that's going to be very prominent. Again, it has policy and it has politics involved in it. But you know, we have, I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that there's an epidemic of, you know, it started out with people with prescription pain medicine, and that's still an issue. But there's a lot of heroin, there's a lot of fentanyl, there's very dangerous drugs. People are overdosing every day in Florida and across the country. You know, it was sort of interesting last session. There wasn't a ton of discussion about it. They did increase some criminal penalties for trafficking.
Right. The presidential election kind of, you know, seemed to drive some of that narrative and follow-up, if you will.
But, you know, I think Jack Latval, the Senate Appropriations Chairman, a couple months ago, held a roundtable down in Palm Beach County, which is one of the ground zeros of this problem. And he, you know, is trying to call attention and start building some support for taking some action on this. And the governor, you know, has now come out with a plan that includes increased money for drug treatment. It also includes trying to place limits on the amounts of prescriptions of prescription painkillers that people can get in their initial prescriptions. You know, there's always been this problem or this issue about people doctor shopping to get these very powerful prescription drugs. So basically, the governor's proposal is to put a 3-day limit on the initial supply, and then, you know, later you could get more.
When your pain is at its peak, basically limit that supply.
And so you know, the pharmaceutical industry came out and said that they would be okay with a 7-day limit, which is kind of a you know, big step for an industry like that to say that, because you know, no industry wants limits on what they can sell.
Right.
So I think this is going to be a really high-profile issue during session, and I think it's one that a lot of people are going to rally around. I mean, you know, everybody knows that there is a problem, a big problem. And I mean, it's been proven over the last couple of years, there is a big problem in the state. And, you know, it's an election year, and this is something people want to get out in front of too. Yeah. Particularly in some areas of the state where it's really hitting hard.
Well, let's shift our focus to just the campaign area, because we have some special elections that are happening, and we had one go down Which by all reports was a bit of a shocker to those that watch elections, the one down in Miami. What happened there? And Senator Taddeo is on her way.
Senator Annette Taddeo will be sworn in on Tuesday morning in the Senate. And yeah, I mean, this was, I think there was a lot of Democrats doing a major celebration after that, those results came in. And I have a feeling there's a lot of Republicans that are kind of scared because, you know, Annette Taddeo was a Democrat in this race to replace Frank Artiles, who resigned in the spring. And she ran against Republican Jose Felix Diaz, who left the House to run for this seat. He had as much money as he needed. He had, you know, the support of the Republican Party, and he worked it hard. I mean, he was not a candidate who was sitting back. But it came election day, and Annette Taddeo came up and beat him fairly soundly. I mean, it was 3.5 points that she won by. And, you know, we've heard a lot over the years about Miami-Dade County, and particularly sort of more southern parts of Dade County, whether the Democrats can make some inroads in those areas. There's been some changing populations, and you know, she pulled it off. And I think, at least in Tallahassee, maybe it wasn't this feeling on the ground, but in Tallahassee, at least, the thinking was that Diaz was going to win that. Yeah. I mean, the Republican Senate leadership had put all their eggs in his basket, essentially, and she pulled it off. So, you know, we've got Ileana, just in that area, Ileana Ross-Lehtinen has, the longtime Republican congresswoman from that area, is retiring.
And that district leans Democrat as well.
And that district is leaned Democrat pretty strongly as well. Right. And, you know, so I would think the Republicans will be pretty worried about that seat for next year. Yeah. Now, there's a whole bunch of Democrats running, and who knows what's going to happen over the next year. But part of the reason the Republicans have been able to hold on to that seat is because Ileana Ross-Lehtinen is so popular, has been so popular, and has been in office for 30 years. You know, so... but they're going to have to try to defend that seat next year, and I would think that the Taddeo victory would cause some concern for Republicans and provide some optimism for Democrats.
Well, yeah, and I remember it was a jump ball last cycle when Senator Artiles was running against two Democrat opponents, and he focused on one. But because it was a lean Democrat district, the Democrats were hopeful that time, but. You know, in the last election it didn't perform that way, but now it performed as written, just about. You know.
Well, so, they had some other issues in that race. I mean, Dwight Bullard was running in the race, and he had some. There were some things that he was easily to be attacked upon. Also, the district is overwhelmingly Hispanic. Right. And Dwight Bullard is not Hispanic, so I think that probably hurt him in the end.
But this time you had two Hispanics.
This time you had two Hispanics, and she's a success. You know, Annette Taddeo is a successful business person. She has been the chair of the Democratic Party in Miami-Dade, so she's not new to the process. Probably new to the voters, new to the activists, and you know, they put together that campaign, and it came through.
It won. So. Well, we'll stay tuned for more campaign notices, and I'm sure once we get clear of the hurricane, I'm sure elected officials and anyone who's campaigning for office will start ramping back up their messaging if they haven't already.
Yeah,
right.
We'll see. Only a year left.
Well, more importantly, session is upon us. We're now in committee weeks, and Jim, we will stay tuned to the News Service of Florida to see all the latest updates.
Well, thanks.
Thank you very much. That's all the time we have for today's show. Tune into our Facebook page at Capitol Dateline Online and check us out on Twitter at the FCTA. Thanks for tuning in.